Welcome to the Northeast Kingdom Voice. I'm your host, Scott Wheeler. Today's guest is Peggy Day Gibson, the director of the Old Stone House Museum. She's here today to talk about a huge undertaking that will be taking place very soon. Welcome to the show, Peggy.
Thank you for having me.
Well, this isn't your first time on the
No,
show.
we do projects all the time, but I think this is the biggest one that I've been involved with.
Right.
We're going to move the former Orleans County Grammar School, which has recently been known as the Brownington Grange Hall. We're going to move it back to the original site where it was built in 1823, which is at the base of Prospect Hill.
Right. And you're not going to just, you could bring in a truck and you could lift it up and move it, but explain how you're doing this.
Well, since we're the historical museum, we thought we would do this historical thing in a historical way. So we are going to bring in about 16 teams of oxen to help pull it up the road.
So, you need that many, or do you give them a break, or do you?
No, the idea is to get the oxen hitched up and then just have them slowly plod up the third of a mile up the road, which is a slight incline, better an incline than downhill. And it'll take about an hour, and then we'll pull the oxen off and the building will move in. And I have to say, it won't just be the oxen pulling it. I think 16 to 20 teams is what we'll have, and that's about what would have pulled the building up the road. However, the oxen mostly are owned by 4-H kids who have them very well trained, and but we're not going to depend on them to pull this building up the road. We'll have a little supplemental power too.
Okay.
What we're trying to create is a historical image.
Right. Now, is it really true that the Old Stone House was built with the use of an oxen that helped lift the...
I believe it. Yeah, I believe it was. I mean, they used oxen. Oxen settled this land. I mean, that's the thing. That's the reason we want to use oxen. First of all, they're steadier and slower than horses, and it'll be much more controlled. But also, the oxen were the power source of early New England.
Right. And is it true that the oxen that built the Old Stone House was later eaten?
I believe that it was.
So we're not going to eat these oxen?
No, we're not going to eat the oxen. But I do believe that it was. We have, in the Old Stone House, we have a yoke for that ox, and it was a small ox. But it sounds like by the end of building the building, they got the oxen to the top floor, possibly to pull up the ridgepole, and then they just couldn't get him down. And I mean, people around here are pretty familiar with cattle.
Right.
They don't like to go down on an inclined plane out in the middle of space. They don't even like to come out of a trailer. So you can understand that oxen maybe would have a hard time coming down. And what's a farmer to do?
Right. I think it's great that you're trying to keep, because, let's be real, you could move that building a lot easier.
Believe me, I've thought of it.
Yeah.
But this is going to be very cool. This is going to be very
So
cool.
you didn't just decide to buy this building. There was a lot of work that went into it. Explain some of the work.
Well, we're in the business of preserving buildings. And this is the most historic building in Brownington and the most historic building related to our story. This was the first school built in Orleans County, the first secondary school. Before this was built, kids could go to the 8th grade in their one-room schools in the little villages, but beyond the 8th grade, there was nowhere to go. And so about 25 years after the beginning of settlement, which is about standard, the area was ready to have a secondary school. And they chose Brownington because Brownington is the town straight in the middle of the county, and also the Hinman Settler Road went right through it, which at that time was called the County Road. It was the first road built in Orleans County from Greensboro to Derby by Timothy Hinman. And by the time the school was built, it was part of the stage route between Boston and Montreal. And there were stagecoach stops and little industries in Brownington Village. And Brownington was a very prosperous town at that point, and so it was chosen to house the first secondary school.
So what year was that made?
That was 1823.
18, yeah,
So it was
was
the school, and the old stone house was built to be the dormitory for that school. Alexander Twilight was such a remarkable man and such a brilliant educator. He established this challenging curriculum which included Latin and Greek and trigonometry and lectures in every science that was becoming known at that time. So he attracted almost 150 students, and it was way too many to board in all the surrounding homes. So that's why he proposed building the old stone house, which he managed himself because the school board was not into it.
You know, as I tell you every time, since I do history and you do history, I've even written about it. I just wished I could go, be able to go back in the time like Sherman and Peabody from that cartoon where they'd get in the Wayback Machine and you'd go back. I often just wonder how, you know, when we talk about these things that we can just get from historic records and that, how accurate we are. It would just be great to be able to go back. Hey, you know, so you said that the school was built when?
1823.
See, I grew up in a house that still stands. It was built in, it was an old one-room schoolhouse, 1826.
And where was that?
On Clyde Street. And that was that was the industrial hub of the Clyde River Valley at that time. It was started by the Arnold family, that entire region, and one of the people who came out of there, he went on to be the second president of Cornell University. And so, but yeah, so I literally grew up in a schoolhouse. And you know, the interesting thing, I don't know if you've ever found anything during any work on the buildings that is really interesting, but you know, we like to think that, you know, that kids all behaved when back then, not like today. Well, we even found notes, a couple notes that were passed back between the students when they were supposed to be working. You could tell that it was passed back and forth. So we have some of that. My father actually found the materials and how much it cost to build that house. Have you found anything really fascinating like that on?
Well, I would say in the old stone house, there's graffiti on the walls. The kids signed their names on some of the walls, and they even etched their names in some of the windows. And we do have a cannonball in our student room, which we have because we have journals that talk about boys getting up in the middle of the night and rolling a cannonball down the hallway and waking up all the boys on their hall and all the girls on the hall on the floor below, and then grabbing the cannonball, hopping back into bed, and acting like they didn't know what was going on when the teachers finally arrived and said, "Who's been doing this?" So we know that.
So things really don't change that much.
Well, no, they don't. And what I wish we had was a journal from Alexander Twilight talking about how he built the old stone house, and we don't have that. And we know he must have written one. He was a preacher and a teacher, and I'm sure he was a journalist, but we don't have that. All we have are his sermons of his writing.
And didn't those come out of nowhere at some point?
Sermons, this was really great. They arrived in the early 2000s from Wisconsin. I think it was Wisconsin. I have to say, I get Wisconsin and Minnesota mixed up, so I apologize for anybody who's from Wisconsin or Minnesota. But
my kids, one of my boys lived in both, and I still get them mixed up.
Well, the thing is that famous people coming out of the school. Well, Alexander Twilight's school was very high end, and there was a family, the Strong family, their grandfather had been the first town clerk in Brownington, and their father was a town clerk, and anyway, the family, when they were, I think they were late teenagers, they moved out west to Wisconsin, and one became the president of the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe Railroad, and made a lot of money. William Barstow Strong, who then came back and retired in Brownington and bought Prospect Hill and built the first observatory for the people in the town. But the other brother was James Woodward Strong, and he became the president of Carleton College. And pretty much when Carleton College was sort of failing and about to go out, he became the president and made it very strong, which it is today. And when he died, the State Historical Society took all of his papers, and when they finally finished going through them, they found that they had all of Twilight's sermons, and Twilight had sent these to his former student, James Woodward Strong, and so that State Historical Society sent them back to us, and I think it was around 2002 we got them.
Yeah, that's great.
So that's amazing,
So,
and things will come back
and maybe
because of that.
Maybe at some point, maybe his journal of building the old stone house might appear.
It might.
Yeah, no.
But other things do appear. I mean, it's true, and more so now with the internet.
Well, I was
People
gonna say
know
that.
all about us.
On the internet now, you know, we can focus all we want on the bad of the internet, and there's plenty of that. But I'm sure you, as a history person, will agree with me who, you know, I use the internet all the time, and I think, how did I ever do this before, you know, without the internet? You can find things out there.
It is amazing.
Yeah, it is.
However, we've been Googling something we can't find.
What's that?
Which is Jingle Bob. And that is a thing we're making in our blacksmith shop for this move. And it's a triangular piece that looks kind of like a dinner bell, and the steel is the same gauge. It's round stock, and it's the same gauge as the ring that's on the, you know, on the ox yoke.
Right.
And then it's this triangular thing that turns it in the other direction, and it like has flattened ends there and a pin going through it, and you put the chain to the team ahead on the front triangle and the chain to the team behind on the back triangle, and it keeps it pivoting and allows teams to be lined up in a column and not pull each other's yokes off.
So it's called a jingle bob.
And it's called a jingle bob, and we heard about it from Steve Allen, who is one of the teamsters who's going to be involved, not with his oxen, because he has pulling oxen and they'll all be shod at that point, but he is a former 4-H leader and very involved with the 4-H groups that are going to come help us out with their oxen, and he knows about this from his father. So we're actually making these in our blacksmith shop, and we'll have them used at the movie.
So is there another name for them, or
I don't know.
Is that a regional name, or?
I don't know. We've looked it up in every blacksmith book that we can find, and we have people trying to look it up. I mean, we've never found anything, any drawing of it. We've looked in ox catalogs for ox equipment. There's nothing like that, but it's a great idea, and we've got the steel, and we're making them.
Well, very possibly it was maybe a local inventor.
Could be.
Who made them, because
it could be a New England thing.
Because I remember I spoke to a woman who has since passed, and I don't recall her name, but her parents owned a blacksmith shop in Albany, and you know, the farmers would come with this. She said sometimes it was just basic horseshoeing, but other times they would say, "This is what I need," and they would explain what, and her father would make it. And so, you know, maybe it was just a very successful local entrepreneur.
Could be, yeah.
But it would be great to hear that story too. So when is this event taking place?
So we're going to have a gathering of oxen on Sunday, August 7th.
Right.
And we'll have all the 4-H kids come up with their teams, and they'll have a whole day full of activities on Sunday, ending up with a lot of practice in hitching the teams together in columns so that they'll be comfortable doing this. And then they'll spend the night, and the next morning we will pull the grammar school up the road.
That's on
Monday, August 8th. And we have to do it on a weekday because we have power and communication lines now, which is quite different from the way they used to move buildings before there were all these lines. And when the trees were small, they moved buildings all the time. In fact, they moved them so much they never wrote anything about them. They never took pictures of them. It was just a very common thing. So, but now we have lines. So at 8 a.m. the power goes off. And Orleans Village Electric, John Morley, will start lowering the electric lines because the building is so tall. It's 34 feet to the peak, and then we need 8 feet for the carriage. So we can't raise them up that much. We're going to lower them. So power goes off, and the communication lines will be also lowered, though I think that they will still be operating.
Right.
But the power's off.
Right.
And then when all that work is done, we will lead the oxen out from the west road and lead them out behind, in front of the building. The building will already have been moved by Messier movers of each Montpelier doing the work for us. And it's on carriages, and they'll move it out to the road and then into the road, get it all lined up. Then we'll lead the oxen out, hitch them, and then the idea is they just start steadily walking ahead. No stopping and starting. We're just gonna slow, and then we'll peel them off when they get to the far side of the U driveway by the Hall House, which is just about across from where we're gonna pull it into Prospect Hill Field. We'll pull the oxen off, lead them around the U driveway, and then let them head back down the road to their trailers.
I guess the question is, I guess I hadn't thought, where are you putting it?
We're putting it exactly where it was, which is on the Prospect Hill side of the Hinman Settler Road. And it's actually, if you're driving on the road, when you come to the high point of the road and then the road starts going down, it's right at that high point, right into the road, about the same distance from the road as the Brownington Congregational Church is.
Now, why was it moved?
Good question. Well, it was moved in 1869, and the Good Templars, who were a temperance group, offered to pay to fix up the building, which was in dire need of repair, if they could move it down to the village and use the upstairs for their meeting place. And in 1869, after the Civil War, many people had begun migrating out of this area. In the Civil War, they found that there were other nice places in the country, including beautiful Virginia, and they weren't quite so cold. And also the West was opening up. Vermont had really used their land to the point where it wasn't producing as much anymore.
Well, there wasn't really many trees left either.
Well, no. I mean, the whole thing is they cut all the trees down, they burned them for potash, and so at the beginning the soil was excellent because it had thousands of years of leaf mulch in the forest, and then they burned them and they had potash, so the harvests were amazing. But they sort of went through all that nutrient, so the ground just wasn't so good anymore. And then anyway, so then the Civil War, a lot of people didn't come back. A lot of people came back damaged. And the school continued on. I'm going to back up a little bit and say Alexander Twilight died in 1857, and he was the charismatic leader of the school. He kept the whole thing together, and the school was declining anyway because as the towns in Orleans County became more established, they each wanted to have their own high school, which you can understand. The school is the heart and soul of the community, and so it was Craftsbury Academy, Derby Academy, Barton Academy, Orleans County Institute in Glover. So a lot of the students stayed in their own towns to go to school, and the tax money stayed with them. So the big central school in Orleans County was declining. Then Alexander Twilight died. They really didn't need a dormitory anymore because they didn't have that many out-of-town students. And he left the stone building to his wife Mercy, who then began to run it as a boarding house, and it became the Old Stone Boarding House until 1915. But so the school was declining. So the grammar school was still on its spot in Prospect Hill. It continued to be a school, but with more local kids, or maybe some kids from the eastern townships who boarded with Brownington families. But we have the old account book for the school, which is quite amazing. And it stops in 1865, and it restarts in 1870 after it was moved. And I've also looked at the town meeting records, which talk on and on about what bad shape the building is in and how they need to do a bunch of repairs. And so it sounds to me like the building was in bad shape and Brownington was kind of in a disarray, and they just didn't use it for 5 years. The Knights of the Templars said, let's move it down to the village where it's more convenient for everybody. You don't have to trudge up into the snow to go to school, and then we'll use it for our place and for you know, a community meeting hall. And it remained a school until 1912, actually, still was a school. And then the trustees of the Orleans County Grammar School gave the building to the town. And ever since, the town has owned it, and the Grange replaced the Knights of the Templar in 1874, so they've been having their meetings in the top floor, and the bottom floor has been community events, home dem. They've had 8th grade graduations there, they've had family parties, dinners after funerals. It's been well used, however, much less in recent times.
Yeah, is that probably because there's the farming? There aren't so many farms?
Well, I think the Grange has declined.
Right.
And then the other thing, even though the Brownington Grange has continued on, a main primary Grange member was Florence Thompson, who lived next door. And sadly, Florence died this March at the age of 105 and a half.
Right.
And she actually died in the same room she was born in. But for many years, Florence hasn't been able to get up to the second floor of the Grange Hall for the meetings, so the Grange was just meeting in her living room. But they still do have Pomona Grange meetings there, and they will continue to have Grange meetings. It will continue to be the Grange Hall, and it will continue to be a community meeting place, a place for community dinners and community celebrations, but it will also have exhibits from the old stone house. I imagine the old schoolroom maybe will mount an exhibit on education in Orleans County with every picture we can find of the one-room schoolhouses and the kids standing in front with their teacher, and the story of education in Orleans County. So I think it will have many uses. It will get much more use, and it will have running water and a flush toilet, which is big. You could keep it historical and have the outhouse, but... Well, you actually can't. I mean, that is the thing. It's
you can't?
State regulations say a public building
I wasn't suggesting
needs
it,
to
though,
have
by the way.
a bathroom. Right.
Yeah.
Well, a lot of people don't use it, though. I would like to say it was clean and neat, but it's now no longer. We tore it off the back.
I was going to say, could you have a non-usable one just to have it historical, accurate looking? You know.
Well, we might. We have a non-usable one on the end of the barn, the new barn that we raised in 2012 by the old stone house. There was a privy there, and we did rebuild it, and it is non-usable, but it's there.
You know, a lot of people, they love to yearn for the days of yesterday. And they only think about the romantic things. They think romantically at the past. I don't look at the days of the outhouse as very romantic. I kind of like today.
Yeah.
No, that is kind of funny, though, that we have a tendency when we look at the past, whether it's our own past, you know, growing up, we have a tendency sometimes to look through our past at rose-colored glasses. I tell people the good old days, no matter what, today's the good old days. You make of it what, so how did, we only have a few more minutes, but so how did you finally get, because I remember years ago, I think you once made a comment to me that you kind of thought it was doubtful you could ever get your hands on this building.
Well, when I first started working at the museum in 2004, I was hired to be the education coordinator, and then in 2007 I became the director. And at first when I heard people wanted to move that back, I thought, well, why would you want to do that? I'm sure the town wants to keep that building, it's in use, it's wonderful, and that's a big project. But as I have spent more time there, I've gotten the bug for historic preservation. And I've watched that building, and it's needed a new roof for years and years. And I have come to realize that keep the water out is the trick with preserving buildings. You know, got to get a new roof on, you got to keep the paint on, keep the foundation good. And I watched that building decline and thought somebody ought to fix that up. And we got through the whole barn raising, and I've kind of felt a little more powerful that, we can do these things. And so actually it was mentioned to me by someone who had been a resident of Brownington, had been a selectman. Is the museum ever going to get that building? Because if you don't, that building is just going to, rot. And I thought, he's right. He's right. We have to save this building. And we began thinking of it. And then I actually mentioned it to the selectmen one time. What would you think about it? And they said, well, we actually wouldn't mind if you took it, because you would fix it up, and it's really a burden for us, and we can't afford to fix it up as a town. And then their insurance company, which they had through the Vermont League of Cities and Towns, decided that they would come and make an inspection of the building, and they didn't want to take the risk to insure it anymore, and they wrote them a letter and they said, we will no longer insure this building for anything other than cleanup. If it burns, we'll give you some money to clean up the debris, but we're not going to have liability insurance anymore or property insurance, and we recommend that you board it up and close it down and don't let anybody use it anymore. And that's a death knell of a building. A building is, the life of a building is in its use. So when we heard that, we thought we really have to save this building. And so we went to the town meeting in 2015 and asked the town if they would give us the building. And we promised that we would move it back to the original site, and that we would fix it up, and it would continue to be a community building.
And one thing led to another.
A unanimous vote. We got it.
And again, it's being moved when?
August 8th.
August 8th.
And be there in the morning. I would say be there at 9 o'clock, because you want to make sure you see it, because once it starts moving, we're not stopping. We want these oxen to just steadily walk up the road. And as I say, the power goes off at 8, and then as the workmen can get ready to go, it'll start happening. But you won't just be twiddling your thumbs. The museum will be open. We'll have some exhibits. We'll have some kids in the cemetery dressed up like all the characters. We'll have kettle coffee going, because we'll have an open fire. We don't need electricity to make kettle coffee. We'll have a couple food trucks. We have an exhibit. We're going to make an exhibit on the history of oxen in Vermont, New England, and the uses of oxen. So if you come on Sunday, you can really appreciate this strong, steady beasts that settle Vermont.
Okay, we only have a couple more minutes, but it seems so fitting now, that the Amish are settling around the old stone house. Granted, I'm not sure if there was ever Amish here before, but because they go by buggies.
Yeah, they drive past all the time. We're on the way between one house and another house.
It just seems like that's just another little, probably people just visit and thinks, well, these people are actors, but they're actually not. They're the Amish who are moving to this area, and it just seems, and I understand you've formed some kind of relationship with them too.
And they're great. They're very friendly. They've come to see the museum. They're quite interested in everything we have. We have a huge collection of farm equipment and all kinds of old tools, and we're getting involved with the Amish. We're making friends with them, and we're hoping to get to know them better.
They make some really good food.
Oh, well, you go by Bob Walker's old farm on the Hinman Road on Saturday morning, you can get donuts and pies and cookies and,
Okay, thanks for coming on, and thank you for all the good work the Old Stone House does for the area, because you guys, from my perspective as a chronicler of history, of living history, you're great to work with. I really appreciate it, and I think we're so fortunate to have you, because a lot of people don't realize that you're such a even though we have some great local historical societies, you're a real repository Whereas, like, I have a hard time with Essex and Caledonia County. You have different repositories, but you don't have an old stone house. Even though St. Johnsbury now has the has a very nice complex themselves.
Yeah. Well, we are the oldest historical society in the state. It was started in 1852 as the Orleans County Natural and Civil History Society, and we have a great story. And it's a beautiful place. It's an authentic historical neighborhood. You're not going to find another place like this in Vermont. We didn't move things in from away like Shelburne. Shelburne Museum, which is wonderful, but this was really there, and this is the final piece. When we move the grammar school building back to its original site, the neighborhood will then be set up the way it was in the 1830s when Alexander Twilight and Samuel Reed Hall lived there.
Okay, well, thanks for coming on.
And thank you for having me on. Thank you for publishing your magazine.
Right,
that's a great collection of stories.
Thank you. And thank you to the viewers for tuning in to another segment of the Northeast Kingdom Voice.